coming in, affecting southern parts to end the week, bringing some exceptionally strong winds.
Well, it's going to be a big day today at the COVID inquiry. Fireworks from at least one person who's giving evidence.
I wonder who that would be, Andrew. Dominic Cummings, maybe? Yeah. You know that name very well. Also, another name you might not know quite as well is Lee Kane. He is up first, giving that evidence.
We'll be there.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 9:30 on Tuesday, October the 31st. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Pip Thompson, who is in for Bev Turner.
MP sacked for backing a ceasefire. The Prime Minister has sacked MP Paul Bristow from a government position for defying the PM by calling for a truce.
I know Paul very well, and I think it was the right thing to happen. I think you have to have a collective government responsibility, you have to have a collective position, and Paul didn't feel that he could maintain that, so, rightly has been moved because of that.
And the Labour MP Andy MacDonald, he's been suspended for using the phrase between the river and the sea as he made a speech urging peace between Israelis and Palestinians at a recent rally.
This is a time for war. That's the message from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has ruled out a ceasefire in Gaza. We'll bring you the latest.
And time to bolster flood defences after Storm Babette battered parts of the UK early this month. MPs are heading to one village in Nottingham today in preparation for Storm Kieran.
King in Kenya. The King and Queen start their 4-day state visit to Kenya. It's where the late Queen's reign began back in February 1952. Let us know your thoughts on all our talking points today. The address, as always, gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get a roundup of all your latest headlines with Sophia.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Israel's Prime Minister has dismissed calls for a ceasefire in the war against Hamas as a ground assault on Gaza intensifies. Quoting the Bible, Benjamin Netanyahu said this is a time for war and that calls for a ceasefire would mean surrendering to terrorism. Health authorities in Gaza say more than 8,300 people have been killed by Israeli attacks. Conservative MP Richard Holden told GB News the government supports Israel but continues to call for a humanitarian pause in the fighting.
The ceasefire basically involves Israel having faced one of the worst terrorist attacks ever, then just laying down its arms. That only benefits one side. That shows that terrorism wins, and I don't think that that can be our position. I think Israel has every right to defend itself. You know, if this had happened to the UK, what we'd have seen would have been thousands and thousands of UK nationals dragged off abroad and taken hostage. We'd have seen tens of thousands of people. Those are the population equivalents, you know, killed here on the streets of the UK. We need to be able to see it in that context.
Labour is expected to clarify its official stance on the Israel-Hamas war later, amid reports of senior figures breaking ranks with the party's leadership. In a speech later, Sir Keir Starmer will reinstate his support for a humanitarian pause to allow aid into Gaza. But he'll also argue that a permanent ceasefire could risk more violence in the region, giving Hamas a chance to carry out more attacks. Two former top aides to Boris Johnson will face questions at the COVID-19 inquiry later. Dominic Cummings, who was the former Prime Minister's chief advisor, was forced to quit in 2020 after travelling from his home in London to County Durham during lockdown. Families of COVID-19 victims held a vigil outside Barnard Castle last night, where Mr Cummings said he'd driven to test his eyesight. Lee Kane, who was Director of Communications, will also appear at the inquiry. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
While the war is creating a divisive time in politics, the Labour MP Andy MacDonald has been suspended by his party leader Sir Keir Starmer for using the emotive phrase "between the river and the sea" as he made a speech urging a ceasefire between Israelis and Hamas at a recent rally.
Meanwhile, the Tory MP Paul Bristow has been sacked by the Prime Minister from his government job after publicly urging Rishi Sunak to push for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Well, joining us to talk about the division in UK politics is the former Labour MP Simon Danchuk. Good to see you this morning.
Good to be here.
So, the parties, they've all got their own problems with this, haven't they? And, you know, it certainly seems Labour's falling apart a little.
Absolutely. I'm very disappointed in Keir Starmer on this, actually. He's allowing a lot of his shadow ministers to come out talking about calling for a ceasefire. Sadiq Khan, Andy Burnham, Anna Sarwar in Scotland are calling for a ceasefire. That's not the line they should be taking. It's not even Keir Starmer's line. So he's struggling to hold the party together on this. And the reality of it is, it's all about votes. This is why I'm so disappointed about it. Many of these people represent constituencies that have large Muslim voters. That's the reality of it. And they're trying to appease those voters. And Keir Starmer is allowing that to happen. So he's effectively abandoning the Jewish community, the Israeli people, by allowing some of his spokespeople to be able to take this line in terms of a ceasefire.
They might be trying to appease their voters. It might also be their personal opinion, because there are plenty of people in this country who are saying a ceasefire is needed because of the amount of innocent people that we are seeing getting killed.
Yeah, the atrocities that were committed on the 7th of October effectively meant that Hamas was going to war with Israel. And Israel is quite within its rights to defend itself, to go into Gaza and to find Hamas. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's what Keir Starmer supports. That's what Rishi Sunak supports. But many people, and it's not a coincidence, many people who have large Muslim voter populations are coming out calling for a ceasefire.
So what should he say in his speech later today? Because Keir Starmer is finally... he knows he can't keep silent any longer. The House of Commons isn't sitting, because it would be very uncomfortable for him if it was. He's making a keynote speech and he's going to take this issue head on. What do you want him to say?
Well, he has to take some action against these people who are calling for the ceasefire. He has to say the party's line is not for a ceasefire, and that the people in the party need to get behind him and support his particular line and support the British government's line on this.
And does he say, but does he say as well in that speech, and if people don't follow my line, I'm firing them from my front bench?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly.
But he won't, though, will he?
That might be quite a few people, Andrew.
It would be a lot.
It really saddens me to say there are direct parallels between what is happening in the Labour Party now and what's happened in the grooming scandals that we've seen in the past, where Labour politicians are ignoring issues because it's Muslim voters that they're worried about losing votes from. That's the reality of it. There are direct parallels, and I'm very sorry to say that that's what's happening now.
Is part of all what's happening, though, Keir Starmer's own making, in a way, because of that radio interview he did, where he said what we think was Israel has a right to defend itself, even if it means water and electricity being cut off. Then he seemed to backpedal. He got himself in a right tangle. And that seems to be the starting point for all this.
Yes, that's right. And he's walking a tightrope, and he has many people saying to him, listen, we need to strengthen our vote in these particular communities. You've got to get this right. You've got to call for a ceasefire. And he's rebelling against that. It shows you how delicate his hold on the party is, in actual fact.
That's an interesting point as well. And, of course, the Labour Party got into a terrible situation with the Jewish community under Jeremy Corbyn, as you know. The report by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission talked about endemic anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Starmer has done his best to clear that up. Is he now going the other way? In fact, he's worrying more about he's worrying too much about the anti-Semitism side and not enough about the Muslim issue?
Well, I think this speech that he makes today is going to try and satisfy everybody.
You can't.
But you can't. And it really calls into question whether he's suitable to be Prime Minister.
Really?
I feel that strongly about it.
Do you?
Yeah, I do, because he should have taken a stronger line on this. He should have had his party behind him on this, and he's let it all unravel. That's the reality.
So is he in trouble?
And it's going to get worse. I don't think the speech today will help in any way at all. It'll create a bigger problem for him.
Across the whole of the UK, though, it's such a polarising issue. Across the whole of the world. So is it really any surprise that this is happening within the Labour Party itself?
But, yeah, well, that's
I know the conversations I've had with family at home, the conversations I've had with family and friends, it is incendiary.
Yes, but I think the vast majority of the British people are behind Israel on this. They've seen what happened on the 7th of October, and they think action needs to be taken. How far do they allow Hamas to exist and carry on doing what they do?
Do you think he's in deep political trouble?
I think it's going to get worse by the day.
Do you?
And I think this speech won't solve any problems for him. It'll create more problems.
But he's going to lead Labour into the next election. You're not suggesting he's in that much trouble?
No, I think he will lead Labour. Labour's very poor at changing their leaders. I call for Ed Miliband to go before the 2015 general election. And
they should have listened.
They should have listened, yeah. Ian Austin did the same. And then we had Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, we never change leaders, so that's highly unlikely. But I think it will cost him votes. Ultimately, it will cost him votes, this issue.
The thing is, you've got the Mayor of London calling for a ceasefire. You've got Andy Burnham calling for a ceasefire.
Scottish Labour leader.
Scottish Labour leader calling for a ceasefire.
And the contrast here is that Rishi Sunak has sacked one of his aides, ministerial aides, Paul Bristow, a very good constituency MP in Peterborough, for calling for a ceasefire. So there's a real contrast between what Sunak is doing and what Starmer...
Yes, because he's suspended a backbench MP who, frankly, it doesn't hardly matter because he's a backbencher, but he's kept all these 13 front benchers have so far broken ranks with the Labour leader, and he hasn't sacked any of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that shows a real weakness. And the people will see this. They read the papers, they watch the news. They will see that Starmer's not provided strong leadership on this issue, and they'll call that into question. It'll cause him problems.
Maybe his speech today might help or provide clarity in some way.
Simon, always good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Now, as the country braces itself for Storm Ciarán, a major incident has been declared across Nottinghamshire due to ongoing flood issues.
Yeah, if Storm Babette wasn't bad enough, Storm Ciarán is on the way this week. DEFRA Minister Mark Spencer is meeting with local residents this morning to listen to concerns and explain government commitments to help them.
Well, joining us from Nottingham is GB News' very own Jack Carson and civil engineer Simon Crowther, who's better known as the flood guy. Jack, let's go to you first.
Yeah, good morning to you both. So as you mentioned, that meeting here in Woodborough this morning, just driving into the village this morning already, it's evident the impact that Storm Babette had on this area. I mean, it's a very different picture already, of course, because of that flooding is now cleared, but the damage that flooding has left behind is what, of course, is a big concern still for residents as they do meet Mark Spencer this morning. Of course, DEFRA and the government have announced support for those households. Just a few days ago, they've announced that flooded households in these areas can apply for up to a £500 cash to help with kind of immediate problems, but then going forward, of course, they can also be eligible for 100% council tax relief. And it's also, of course, in anything like this, particularly in smaller villages, those small to medium-sized businesses as well, they've been given support by the government as well. In these affected areas, they can have support up to £2,500, it says, from a business recovery grant to help them return quickly. And every owner of a property that's been hit by a flood, the government say, can apply up to £5,000 to make their home and business more resilient for future flooding. Of course, that is one of the big concerns here, of course, as you mentioned, with Storm Ciarán on the way. It's how going forward, actually, these villages, these towns around Nottinghamshire, of course, were so battered by Storm Babette, can actually protect themselves here in the future.
All right, Jack, thanks for that. And we're now going to talk to the Mr. Floodman himself. Simon, morning.
Morning. So you're in the village I grew up in, Woodborough, which has been hit by floods repeatedly. The village have been looking since 2007 to try and get a wider catchment scheme done to mitigate the risk. A lot of the villagers have actually done their own defences already. It's great to hear about the £5,000 grant, but that figure hasn't increased since 2015, and the cost of defences has risen significantly. That figure also includes VAT. Flood defences have VAT on, so instantly you've lost 20% of that. So this figure really doesn't go very far. It should look to be increased, but the advantage now we've got over previous floods is actually thanks to Build Back Better, which is a flood re-initiative, so the scheme that partners the government with insurance companies. As part of Build Back Better, homeowners can be eligible for £10,000 over and above their insurance claim to put the property back in a more resilient way. So that might be putting down a tiled floor instead of a wood floor. But only 67% or around 67% of the insurance companies signed up to that. So it's a postcode lottery as to whether you might actually have Build Back Better. So if you are looking at getting insurance for the future, be asking your insurance company, are they signed up? But it's good today that we've got sort of Mark Spencer and Tom Randolph MP coming to meet the village because they've done as much as they possibly can. But the flooding is becoming so significant that it's really dangerous. And I'm worried that we're going to have more loss of life because of flooding and the government's backpedaling on their environment commitments. So we're only going to end up with a worse and worse issue, and we're not doing enough about it.
Simon, we were expecting Storm Ciarán this week, aren't we? And we only got over Storm Babette, it feels like, yesterday. How concerned are you there in Nottinghamshire that Storm Ciarán is going to bring yet more problems this week?
I think because the ground is so saturated, we're really on a sort of knife edge of it not going to take much rainfall to cause a significant impact. Yesterday, there was only about 15 millimetres of rain, and the village next to Woodborough, Lamley, actually flooded. Storm Babbitt, to put it into perspective, we had 4 times the amount of rain as yesterday. So it's just the fact that the ground now is so saturated, so wet, it can't absorb any water. So even a small amount of rain is running straight off the land and actually causing flooding. So I think we've got to really monitor this storm, Kieran, that's coming in, and be as careful as possible. And obviously, the main consideration has to be protecting life. We lost lives in Storm Babbitt, and the thing that concerns me most with flooding is we're talking about it now, but on a dry day in August, you wouldn't want to talk to me about it, and nor would anyone else, because it's seen as though it might never happen. Flooding is only going to happen more and more, and we need to be thinking about it all year round, not just in the run-up to a storm or the aftermath of a storm.
And just very quickly, Simon, who calls you the flood guy? Did your family call you the flood guy?
Do you know who actually started it? Is Sky News, one of your competitors. They called
we won't talk about them.
They're not.
I'm going to trademark that. So,
they're not competitors, Simon. We crushed them.
So I trademarked the flood guy, and that's now what I'm known as.
OK. Well, thank you very much for talking to us on GB News. And wash your mouth out with those words that you just said. Jack, thank you as well. Well, it's not just Nottingham, as flooding has been reported in parts of Northern Ireland as police urge people against travelling due to an amber rain warning.
So the Met Office warning for Northern Ireland is the second highest level and covers counties Antrim, Down and Armagh.
Well, joining us now is our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, we talk about amber warnings. Just talk us through exactly what that means and how prepared people are around you today.
Well, this started last night about 5 o'clock. Real heavy rain came in from Kilkeel direction and then up through Newry into Armagh, Dungannon and onwards. And this city, Newry, is a beautiful city, but it sits right on the border and it's between 2 valleys and it goes out to a main port outside Warren Point. So the water systems here are very tidal as well. And you can just see behind me if Town Hall had any worries or not receiving the notion that the flooding is there. You can just see behind me there, that is the Town Hall. And of course, the flood is coming right up to the front end of it. The city to the left-hand side of me, one of the main shopping areas here, is also flooded, and that is causing problems, of course, for people who have just came back to the city centre after all that working at home, etc. So there is sewerage coming up out of the gratings here because these floods that have come down in, I mean, as I was coming in here earlier on, the roads were so badly flooded on the way through, and everything is washing off the fields that are already sodden. It's washing into that valley and washing into this main canal that is heading out toward the sea. And the very bad news for the people of Newry, of course, is that high tide is expected at 12 o'clock, which will make matters here much, much worse.
Sounds pretty bleak, doesn't it? Doogie, thanks for that. That's Doogie Beattie in Northern Ireland. We'll keep you up to date on that, of course.
Yeah, we'll stay across it.
Water's right. Now, the King and Queen have begun their 4-day state visit to Kenya.
This was early this morning. Take a look at this. Meeting delegates in Nairobi at the start of their visit.
There he is. There's the King. If you're listening on the radio, that's the King inspecting an armed guard, as they always do on these trips. This is his first state visit to a Commonwealth country as King, and Charles, we're told, is going to acknowledge the painful aspects of his nation's shared history with Kenya, which celebrates its 60th year of independence in 2023.
Well, with us now in the studio is GB News' royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. This is a very, let's say, delicate visit, isn't it, for the King and Queen?
I think it certainly is. It's going to be the most challenging foreign visit of the King's reign so far. We saw those pictures there of the pomp and pageantry, as you said, Andrew, that always comes along with these kind of state visits. But I think the real challenge is outside of the State House gates and barriers where, let's say, the real people are. There are descendants of tribal leaders who were part of the Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s, who opposed the British rule of Kenya back then. In response, the British rulers did commit its thought atrocities to those people. 90,000 estimated Kenyans were either executed, tortured or maimed, according to the Kenyan Human Rights Commission. The British government did pay out nearly £20 million in 2013 because of that, but they are demanding that the King, during this visit, apologises for those past wrongdoing.
But he can't and won't, will he? Because of the precedent it will set.
No, exactly. The British government's stance is that why should a modern-day government have to apologise for the wrongdoings of the colonial past 50, 60 years ago?
And the Kenyan, just to interrupt you briefly, the Kenyan government wanted to put down the Mau Mau uprising too. Has to be said.
It's understood President Ruto, who the president of Kenya at the moment, wants to really look forward to the future of the British and Kenyan relationships, strengthening the relations. We're in a very increasingly competitive world with the influence of Russia, America and China in the region. And the British government, of course, who's the people who send the King on this state visit, really wants to use the King's power of soft diplomacy to improve trading relations, amongst other things. I was speaking to Dr. Chris Imafidon, who was at the Kenyan reception at Buckingham Palace last week. He does lots of work with young people, and he was saying that Britain has an ageing population, which is a real problem in terms of filling the workforce in 20 years' time. Kenya, a very young population, and the King is expected to spend lots of time with Kenyan youth, studying digital, new, innovative skills who perhaps could, as a Commonwealth nation, help fill that workforce gap.
It's impossible not to talk about this visit without being reminded of the Prince and Princess of Wales's visit to Jamaica last year, where it was a bit of a PR disaster, wasn't it? There was the pictures of Catherine shaking children's hands through the fence, then they did that rooftop ride, all in white.
Dressed in colonial white.
Although that was at the request of the Jamaican government. That was a British
thing. Do you think lessons will have been learned from that?
I think they certainly would have been. As you said, it did really overshadow that trip to the Caribbean. The King is expected to nod and acknowledge the wrongs of Britain's colonial past. That's according to his Deputy Private Secretary. I think we'll see a nod to it in his speech tonight at the State's banquet. As for a formal apology, I don't think we'll get that. I think both Palace and government officials will really want to be trying to keep the spotlight on the engagements the King is carrying out to strengthen relations. But, of course, in the background, we still have very angry people in Kenya who want more than just a nod and acknowledgement from His Majesty.
Quite a symbolic place for the royal family, because, as we know, the Queen was in Kenya on a trip with Prince Philip when she discovered she'd become the Queen. And Kenya was also the first country Charles did a state visit on his own, without the Queen, when he was 23, and where he was nearly run over by a rampaging elephant.
Oh, wow.
That's absolutely true.
Well, we are expecting to see the King...
Was he hurt?
No, the elephant came charging out of the bushes, saw Charles, and the instinct is to run. He didn't run.
He sees Charles and
the elephant went the other way. Absolutely true. The elephant went the other way.
Nothing personal.
Yeah.
Nothing personal at all.
So he said, it could all have been so different if the elephant had kept running.
It certainly would have been, I'm sure. We are expecting to see them.
Princess Anne was looming in the background. That's probably what put the elephant off. But I wouldn't cross Princess Anne lightly.
But Kenya's also where Prince William engaged...
Got the question.
Catherine as well, yeah.
Handed over
Sorry,
the engagement
we've got to move on. We're being
right.
shouted at.
Okay.
Much more still to come. Stay with us.
Good morning. Whilst there's some fine weather across parts of Scotland, elsewhere it's going to be a changeable day this Tuesday. I'm Alex Burkill. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast. Heavy showery rain overnight, continuing for a time across eastern parts of Northern Ireland. Could be some difficulties on the roads this morning, so do take care. Elsewhere, showery rain across many parts of England and Wales through the day, but some drier, brighter weather for a time before some wet and windy weather pushes in from the southwest later. Drier and brighter across parts of Scotland, but chilly here. Temperatures struggling, milder in the south with highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius. If you're going trick-or-treating this evening, there will be a band of rain pushing its way up from the southwest, but more northern areas staying drier for longer. But that wet and windy weather will sweep its way northwards across the bulk of the UK as we go through the early hours of Wednesday. For many, it will be a relatively mild night because of the wind and the rain, but a touch of frost possible in the far north of Scotland. That wind and rain then continues for many as we go through Wednesday. It could be heavy and persistent at times, particularly across northern areas, with then showery spells following in behind across the rest of the country, and some of these showers could be heavy with some rumbles of thunder mixed in too. Notice the beginnings of Storm Ciarán starting to push its way in from the southwest later on. Temperatures, nothing really to write home about, especially because of the blustery, unsettled weather that many of us will have. Looking ahead then, yes, Storm Ciarán coming in, affecting southern parts to end the week, bringing some exceptionally strong winds.
And I can tell you shortly we'll be going live to the COVID inquiry, where we're expected to hear some fireworks from one former advisor to the Prime Minister Boris Johnson called, remember him? Dominic Cummings.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel. Stay with us.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 31st of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson in for Bev Turner.
Well, coming up, Dominic Cummings. He's set to give evidence to the COVID inquiry this morning. We're expecting fireworks. Boris Johnson's former advisor is certainly going to stick the boot in. We'll bring you all the latest.
Scampton court battle. Protests and a High Court case today over whether 2,000 migrants will be housed at RAF Scampton, home of the famous dambuster pilots. GB News reporter Ray Addison is outside the High Court.
The RAF Scampton and Wethersfield sites face legal challenges today as two councils question the Home Office's use of Class Q emergency powers to bypass planning laws.
And GB News reporter Will Hollis is in Scampton.
The nights are getting colder and darker, but for people sleeping here outside of RAF Scampton, they say they aren't going anywhere until the Home Office scraps its plan to house 2,000 asylum seekers at the former Dambusters airbase.
Support for veterans. GB News' Patrick Christie's is raising money for the Royal British Legion to show support for our veterans. And we'd love to think what you think about all our stories today, so do get in touch. Email us at GBNews or even GBViews
yeah, that would do.
GBnews.com. That's correct, isn't it?
I think it is.
First, here are all your headlines with Sophia.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Israel's Prime Minister has dismissed calls for a ceasefire in the war against Hamas as a ground assault on Gaza intensifies. Quoting the Bible, Benjamin Netanyahu said this is a time for war and that calls for a ceasefire would mean surrendering to terrorism. More than 8,300 people in Gaza have been killed by Israeli attacks. Conservative MP Richard Holden told GB News that the government supports Israel but urges for a humanitarian pause in fighting.
The ceasefire basically involves Israel having faced one of the worst terrorist attacks ever, then just laying down its arms. That only benefits one side. That shows that terrorism wins, and I don't think that that can be our position. I think Israel has every right to defend itself. You know, if this had happened to the UK, what we'd have seen would have been thousands and thousands of UK nationals dragged off abroad and taken hostage. We'd have seen tens of thousands of people. Those are the population equivalents, you know, killed here on the streets of the UK. We need to be able to see it in that context.
Labour is expected to clarify its official stance on the Israel-Hamas war later, amid reports of senior figures breaking ranks with the party's leadership. In a speech later, Sir Keir Starmer will reinstate his support for a humanitarian pause to allow aid into Gaza. But he'll also argue that a permanent ceasefire could risk more violence in the region, giving Hamas a chance to carry out more attacks. Two former top aides to Boris Johnson will face questions at the COVID-19 inquiry later.
How's your eyesight, Mr. Cummings?
Dominic Cummings, who was the former Prime Minister's chief advisor, was forced to quit in 2020 for breaking lockdown rules. Families of COVID-19 victims held a vigil outside Barnard Castle last night, where Mr Cummings said he'd driven to test his eyesight. Lee Kane, who was the Director of Communications, will also appear at the inquiry. The rate at which prices are increasing has slowed for the fifth consecutive month. Shop price inflation was 5.2% higher in October than this time last year. The British Retail Consortium says that's down 1% from September. Food inflation also slowed, down to its lowest rate since last July. There's more relief on the way today for households feeling the pinch from the rising cost of living. Those eligible will receive a payment of £300, with the second in a series of support packages. The money will be deposited into the bank accounts of people on certain benefits and will have no impact on existing benefits. More than 8 million households will be helping by the cost of living payments. Council budgets are tightening in the face of rising costs as local authorities cut back on the government's levelling up plans. Plans to revitalise high streets in several town centres have been revised as costs balloon, in some cases by 50%. It means that just 15% of money awarded by the Levelling Up Fund has been spent since it was created in October 2021. Around 400,000 patients who've on the waiting list for the longest NHS care will be asked if they're willing to go elsewhere. People who've been on wait lists for more than 10 months may receive a letter, text message or email to ask if they're considered travelling for treatment. Transferring patients to other hospitals could help bring back down record backlogs in the health service, currently standing at 7.75 million. Flooding has hit parts of Northern Ireland, with people warned to avoid travel. The Met Office issued an amber warning in counties Antrim, Down and Armagh. And people across Northern Ireland are under a yellow alert today and tomorrow. More than 25 flood warnings have been issued for the UK, with Storm Ciarán set to bring strong winds and heavy rain to parts of England and Wales. And the King and Queen arrived in Kenya a short time ago, beginning a 5-day state visit. Accompanied by Queen Camilla, His Majesty was greeted by the Kenyan President William Ruto. It's the King's first visit as monarch to the country, where his mother became Queen in 1952. He's expected to address some of the more painful aspects of the country's shared colonial history, as Kenya prepares to mark 60 years of independence. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now, it's back to you.
Well, let's see what you've been saying at home. Lots of news and views. Mike says about the Tory who's been lost his job as Parliamentary Private Secretary, the lowest rung on the ministerial ladder. I'm glad Rishi's got rid of that Tory MP that called for a ceasefire. Israel has a right to defend itself. But Sue, thanks for getting in touch. You say, I think history will look well upon Paul Bristow. Good for him for standing up for the Palestinian people. Pity more politicians don't have his backbone. And on floods, because we fear there's going to be more with Storm Ciarán on its way. And Duncan says, I wonder when people will finally realise it's not a good idea to build on floodplains. What do they think is going to happen? Honestly. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And Paul says, I'm fed up of all these storms being called all these stupid names. Makes no sense. Yeah, I think it's the Met Office, isn't it, that names them? Yeah, do you think they draw them out of a hat? I have no idea. Maybe they go to the pub after work and then have a bit of a chit-chat about it. Who knows? Maybe it's named after one of the meteorologists. I'm going to let you read the last one. OK, yeah, this one's a classic. Andrew's haircut. Michael, thank you for getting in touch. You say Andrew's new haircut makes him look like he's about to join Peaky Blinders. Am I Tommy Shelby? Are you Tommy Shelby? He's a very dark character. Oh, he is very dark. You just need the cap. Have you got the cap? I have got a cap. Maybe I'll bring it in tomorrow. Right. Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I hadn't thought about Tommy Shelby, but as a fan of Peaky Blinders, I'll think of you. It's a great series. Fabulous. Great series. Now, the High Court will hear an injunction today to try to stop migrants, 2,000 of them, from being housed at the former RAF site and Dam Busters home in Scampton. The Home Office plans to convert the RAF site into a migrant camp for up to 2,000 asylum seekers. Well, joining us live is Ray Addison from the High Court in London, and Will Hollis is in Scampton. So, Ray, bring us up to date with exactly what this court hearing is going to determine.
Well, this all kicks off in about half an hour here in the planning court at the Royal Courts of Justice. We've got these two hearings getting underway. Mrs. Justice Thornton will be the judge presiding over these cases. As you were saying, we've got that injunction application from West Lindsey District Council, those plans by the Home Office to house 2,000 migrants at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire. Also, we have the case brought by Braintree District Council as well. They're fighting plans to house 1,700 asylum seekers at Wethersfield Airfield in Essex. So they're being heard at the same time, these cases. Both councils arguing the same thing. They say the Home Office doesn't have the necessary planning permission. Well, the Home Office is actually using these wartime powers, these Class Q emergency powers to bypass those planning laws. Of course, these Class Q powers are designed to be used either in an emergency or to prevent an emergency. So lawyers for the Home Office will be arguing that that is the situation that they find themselves in. We know that Braintree Council earlier had issued an enforcement notice actually barring the Home Office from carrying out any further work at Scampton. There's no migrants currently there. The spokesperson for the council said they toured the site where the Home Office was doing this work and had seen that, in their opinion, it was clear that the the site was being designed to be used for longer than 12 months, which is what the Home Office had initially said. And in that case, the council is arguing they haven't done the necessary environmental impact assessments and various other bits of paperwork. Over in Wethersfield, we know that the council and even our Foreign Secretary James Cleverly have argued that that site is just simply too remote to house refugees. Refugee charity Care for Calais saying that the buildings are in a state of disrepair, and that also the use, they argue, of a former military base is likely to actually re-traumatise refugees who may have had unpleasant experiences, and obviously part of the reason why they've been seeking refuge. There are at least 94 asylum seekers currently on that site, and we do know that at least one had previously gone on a hunger strike in protest at what they were describing as the prison-like conditions. Home Office, of course, arguing against today's injunctions. They're saying that these surplus military sites or former military sites provide cheap accommodation for refugees and are better than using hotels because it's less on the public purse.
OK, Ray Addison, thank you very much for that. Well, let's talk to Will Hollis, who is at RAF Scampton. Lots of interest then, Will, into what is going to happen with this court case. What have people been saying to you? That lots of people are still camping out, aren't they?
Yes, well, one thing you won't find here at RAF Scampton right now is asylum seekers, but the government wants to move at least 2,000 of them in when they've finished preparation. Former airbase. But what you will find is a steady stream of protesters coming and going, some of them often staying overnight, sleeping for days on end. There was one campaigner who's down in London for the High Court, Sarah Carter, who's from the Save Our Scampton campaign. She spent a month sleeping outdoors, monitoring the number of trucks that were coming in, particularly relating to an enforcement notice, as Ray just mentioned, to count the number of trucks and what they might be bringing in, because judging by West Lindsey District Council standards, they were doing so illegally. There are sort of two groups here at RAF Scampton. One is the groups of people that have been protesting here every single day for the last 7 months. Now, those are people that live on RAF Scampton's camp, the former married living quarters, the people that live on the other side of the wire, you might describe it as. Now, those are the people that will ultimately be impacted by asylum seekers moving in here. But as the news around this has grown and the tension has grown, more people have been coming from outside of the county of Lincolnshire, people from nearby Yorkshire, places like Doncaster, Hull and Sheffield. But now more than ever so, people in the south, we've heard that one person came up from Devon to show their support. In the Midlands as well, people from places like Birmingham. That's how strongly people feel, particularly about the fact that this is the former home of the dam busters, the RAF squadron that blew up those dams in Germany in 1943, changing the course of the public perception of the war. But there is also a £300 million regeneration that is planned here, and people want that regeneration to happen instead of asylum seekers moving in.
It really is. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Will Hollis in Scampton and Ray Addison talking to us from the High Courts in London.
And, you know, the government's damned if it does and it's damned if it doesn't. They've got more than 50,000 asylum seekers, illegal migrants, in hotels at a cost of £8 million a day. They've got to find somewhere to put them.
Exactly.
But every time they find somewhere, they say, we agree, but not here.
But then, they don't come up with a really great idea as to where, do they?
I know. I mean, the barges is opposed down in Portland.
Well, the barges take a fraction of the people that are needed. Yeah. You need a lot of barges.
You do.
Anyway,
it's an issue that will run and run. Now, we are, of course, expecting Dominic Cummings and Lee Kane to appear at the COVID inquiry today, probably any time soon. Very senior former Downing Street employers, and we're expecting fireworks, frankly. Lee Kane currently is speaking. Tom Harwood's with us, our Deputy Policy. Tom, just remind people who Lee Kane is.
Lee Kane was the Director of Communications for Boris Johnson in Downing Street through the start of his period as Prime Minister. He left around the same time. time that Dominic Cummings left government. He was seen as being part of that Vote Leave fraction. He worked with Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson in the Vote Leave campaign during Brexit, was brought into Downing Street to run a similar sort of line of communications, although, of course, there was a lot of infighting in that Downing Street, different factions formed. And he left. But he was in charge of the overall communications of government, particularly for that early period in COVID that we're talking about now and that the inquiry is looking at. Lee Cain has just been speaking in the inquiry, and in his opening questions, he's been saying that at the start of the inquiry, at the start of the pandemic, COVID was seen as something that was manageable, should be looked at departmental rather than number 10 level. And there were all of these global surveys that said the United Kingdom was one of the best, if not the best country in the world in terms of pandemic preparedness. And we've seen those sort of surveys that were being passed around at the time. So the government sort of thought that this was all manageable, and so it wasn't a high priority in number 10.
But then it all started to unravel, and unravel rather quickly. It is going to be a very difficult week, isn't it, for the families, relatives, who a number of whom are gathering outside there again today. And it will be the first time that we've seen Dominic Cummings since he gave evidence. Was it last year? Do you remember, in front of the government?
There was a parliamentary inquiry.
There was a parliamentary inquiry.
Right.
This is going to be slightly different, isn't it?
Yes, so this is a statutory inquiry with many more teeth, and it will, of course, go on for a much longer sort of period of time and produce much more authoritative outcomes, although there are some criticisms in terms of how it's being run, who is being questioned, who gets the more forensic questioning, and all the rest of it. But clearly, today we're going to see some pretty harsh criticism of some of the political players from Dominic Cummings. I think perhaps the bigger question is, will Dominic Cummings turn his guns on some of the scientists as well? After all, at the start of the pandemic, there was this agreed strategy from the government and from SAGE to sort of have this more moderate approach to the virus, suppress it rather than crush it, and sort of have more moderate interventions. That, of course, then changed in mid-March when we went into full lockdown. And I do wonder if Dominic Cummings will have as much vitriol for the scientists' early views as he clearly does for Boris Johnson.
Can he inflict much more damage on the reputation of Boris Johnson, bearing in mind he's put the boot in spectacularly at that parliamentary inquiry last year, all the tweets that he's been unleashing about Boris Johnson? Can he do much more damage, do you think?
There's a big question in terms of whether or not there are messages that Boris Johnson sent or that Dominic Cummings sent that have been withheld up until this point. Dominic Cummings has already published a lot of stuff on his own Substack blog. He has spoken, of course, in that parliamentary inquiry. But we have been seeing new WhatsApp messages appear throughout this inquiry because they've got so many more statutory powers to look at those sorts of messages. Has Dominic Cummings kept something back that we're going to see today? That's a big question mark, and we'll be seeing that throughout this morning.
It would be his style for him to have done that.
We should remind ourselves as well that Dominic Cummings broke lockdown rules.
He did. He denies it, but of course he staged that ludicrous press conference in the Downing Street Garden, which went on for hours and hours. You might have been there, Tom, and where he said it was completely improper. It was proper for him to drive his family up to Durham, even though he had symptoms of COVID. And then, of course, he drove his family 30 miles to Barnard Castle beauty spot. He said to check his eyesight, see whether he could drive his car back to London, where most of us would go to Specsavers.
Yes, he has changed his story on this at in the parliamentary inquiry. Of course, it was one of the first questions that was asked of him. Now, initially at that press conference in the Rose Garden, he said that this was all to do with isolating himself and his family because he suspected they had COVID. He stayed within his family unit. He drove up in a way that didn't involve any public transport or mixing with individuals. He later said at the parliamentary inquiry last year that it was more to do with the safety of his family and threats that had been received and some advice he had been given as well. I wonder if he will advance on that at all or if he just will not sort of touch upon that. After all, this is about decision-making with regard to the pandemic, this inquiry today. The questions of Dominic Cummings will be about those decisions that were made in government. I wonder, though, whether the inquiry lawyers will touch upon his own personal conduct, although not strictly speaking to do with the decision-making. There was some suggestion we saw in the WhatsApps released yesterday that Boris Johnson considered relaxing rules in the summer of 2020 in order to almost be a distraction from the Dominic Cummings story. Now, he might well be questioned about that because, of course, that is relevant to decisions that were made at the time of the pandemic.
Well, I mean, it's alleged, isn't it, that Boris Johnson verged from one decision to another, one strategy to another, hence the shopping trolley emoji that keeps cropping up quite a lot.
Absolutely.
In his WhatsApp messages.
This was an invention of Dominic Cummings to replace the words Boris Johnson with a single emoji of a shopping trolley to describe the way in which Boris Johnson would, in one meeting, say, yes, we've got to lock down, we've got to suppress the virus, and then in the next moment would say, actually, you know what, we should take it on the chin, we should open all up, we should let it rip. Dominic Cummings found it incredibly frustrating that Boris Johnson sort of wasn't of single mind on this issue and went from one position to the other. Of course, what Boris Johnson would say is that this was a rapidly evolving situation, the facts were changing, the speed of the virus was changing, and the advice that he was receiving from different corners was different.
But we all know consistency was never Boris Johnson's strongest point.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting
or in his private life.
No, well, quite.
And yet, most people would agree at the end of the pandemic, or at least when the United Kingdom was bringing the pandemic to the end, when Boris Johnson had a sort of singular mission, you know, we had the vaccine, it was proved to be safe and effective, and he had that mission of rolling it out. The United Kingdom was the fastest major country in the world to roll out that vaccine. That was almost a singular sort of Churchillian mission that he had, and it was clear that when he knew what to do, he could roll that out quickly. And However, when he didn't know what to do, then that was chaos.
And so much damage had been done before you finally got to that vaccine rollout.
But the vaccine rollout was a remarkable success.
And that is the remarkable
thing. And the EU was a disaster.
The United Kingdom was undoubtedly sloppy in the first half of the pandemic, but very precise in the second half of the pandemic. Now, altogether, that means that we're pretty much middle of the pack when it comes to death stats compared to EU countries and the like. But, of course, the early stats were much worse. The later stats were much better. I wonder if the inquiry will touch on that very much because, of course, by the time that we had the sort of success towards the end of the pandemic, well, Dominic Cummings and Lee Cain were on their way out.
They were. They should concentrate on that because that's what people want to know about. The government's response.
Well, of course, they should do both. They should do both. And I think that ultimately what is a measured appraisal of what happened over the 2 years of the pandemic is a mixed set of scenarios. There were some things the country did very, very well. There were other things the country did very, very poorly. And I think any inquiry that doesn't focus on both of those different strands will be doing a disservice.
Great. And Tom, and you're going to be at the inquiry later.
I will be.
Tom will be reporting to us.
What's your updates? Thank you.
We shouldn't forget either that Boris nearly died of COVID.
He did, and some people might say, did that affect his judgment?
Because he was sick for quite a while before he went into hospital.
He was not off work for that long, was he?
No, he came back. I think he was back after about 4 or 5 days, and he was probably still sick. I'm not excusing him, but I think it should be taken into account.
What government before had had to deal with a pandemic?
No, never.
I mean,
Tony Blair actually said to me, I bumped into him in Westminster, he said, this is the biggest challenge to any government since the Second World War. That's what he said about COVID.
Did he?
Yeah. He cut Boris Johnson a lot more slack.
Well, that underlines how difficult it was.
The biggest challenge that any government's faced since the Second World War. And he was Prime Minister for a very long time.
I mean, I think Boris Johnson's strength was he was good on the telly communicating to people, wasn't he?
Telling us to lock down and not to do any parties.
And you felt you connected with what he was saying, and you, in some ways, you didn't want to break the rules at that time.
I know, unlike some people.
Well, and unlike what we found out
what was going on in number 10. Well,
OK, we need to move on.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
But thank you, Tom. Now, Patrick Christie's Poppy appeal has raised more than 800%.
I think that's supposed to say £80,000.
Really?
Yeah.
OK. Well, it's still amazing. Whatever it is, it's amazing.
He thought he was going to raise 10,000, and we're now almost up to £90,000.
OK.
Yeah.
Well, we are going to go live to him in Brighton next, so do stay with us. This is Britain's Newsroom.
world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Well, it's 10:27. 10:27. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson, who's in for Bev.
Now, GB News' own Patrick Christie's has raised almost £90,000 so far in his Royal British Legion's poppy appeal. Just incredible.
It really is. He's only been doing it for about 5 minutes. In some areas of the country, like Brighton, apparently it's not so easy to find volunteers to sell poppies, so Patrick went to Brighton to help out.
Patrick, good morning to you. What's it been like, the reaction you've been getting in Brighton? And my goodness me, what a fantastic job you have done.
Oh, thank you very much. No, the reaction's been all right. We've not been here too long, so we've had just a few people coming up and saying hello and saying that their relatives' names are on this war memorial, which you'll see behind me here. A couple of the bus drivers tooting their horns. It's great stuff. So, look, basically, I read an article about a week ago which said that Brighton was struggling to replace a long-standing British Legion poppy-selling volunteer. And that was a problem because they'd raised 10 grand last year. So I thought, well, that can't really stand in Britain at the moment. Britain, I do think, feels a little bit under the cosh. We're all seeing what's going on at the moment, especially in London. The cenotaph is being barricaded off, which is, I think, a visible
sign, isn't it, of maybe where Britain is at the moment. So I thought, look, let's come and do something about it. There is a patriotic majority in this country. Let's try and raise a little bit of money for the Poppy Appeal. And I set up a Just Giving page. It's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy, and in less than 24 hours we've basically hit £90,000, which is a testament to the great spirit of our viewers and our listeners. So thank you very, very much, everybody. We haven't even really started yet. I'm going to be doing my show from the British Legion Club round the corner from here. We've got a few guests lined up, and yeah, we're just going to see how much money we can raise and just show people that people really do care about Britain and about our veterans and everything that stands for.
I hope, Patrick, that is a 100% plastic-free poppy that you're wearing.
Oh no, it's not. But I have managed to live my life, Pip, untroubled by the concerns about plastic. So I'm just going to continue in that vein.
Quite right too.
No, that's fair enough.
Man after my own heart.
I do wonder with the whole Poppy campaign this year, because we're moving to a cashless society, does that make it more of a challenge?
I think that's probably a very good point, actually. Patrick, thanks very much. I think it's a very good point, but I carry cash always.
Do you?
Yeah, always. So I can put my pound or a couple of pounds in my in the Laurel British Legion tin. They're going to have these card things, like you see with buskers and the tube.
Yeah.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they suggest £3, which I think is
I have to say, I moved away from it, and you'll all go, oh, God, that's ridiculous. But I moved away from it during the pandemic.
What, cash?
Because of the whole hygiene and coins and I know. But at the time, we were so careful, weren't we?
People are now rallying to cash because actually last year the use of cash went up for the first time for many years. Because I think people think it's under threat because these wretched banks are closing down branches everywhere and closing down cash dispensing machines. Don't do it. I've also, by the way, very proudly have a chequebook. And I'm not giving it up.
No way.
I have a chequebook and I like using it.
I found a chequebook at home and I just did that.
No.
I did.
Part of history. And I get notes from the bank saying, do you still want to carry on with your chequebook, Mr. Pearce? I do. Thank you.
How many cheques do you write a month?
Not many. It's the principle. It's the principle. Still to come.
How old are you?
Older than you.
OK, still to come.
I'm a 60s baby.
Is the word mother offensive? A council was accused... I knew this would get you... Ease off. A council was accused of writing out women today for purging the word mother from its pregnancy and maternity leave policy to be more inclusive.
A Lib Dem council, of course, in case you hadn't guessed.
We will find out later. Plus...
Fast food, died mice and terrified customers. Is this protest or just criminal behaviour? That and much more after your morning news with Sophia.
It's 10:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Israel's Prime Minister has dismissed calls for a ceasefire in the war against Hamas as the ground assault on Gaza intensifies. Quoting the Bible, Benjamin Netanyahu said this is a time for war and that calls for a ceasefire would mean surrendering to terrorism. Health authorities in Gaza say more than 8,300 people have been killed by Israeli attacks. Conservative MP Richard Holden told GB News that the government supports Israel but continues to call for a humanitarian pause in the fighting.
The ceasefire basically involves Israel having faced one of the worst terrorist attacks ever, then just laying down its arms. That only benefits one side. That shows that terrorism wins, and I don't think that can be our position. I think Israel has every right to defend itself. You know, if this had happened to the UK, what we'd have seen would have been thousands and thousands of UK nationals dragged off abroad and taken hostage. We'd have seen tens of thousands of people, those are the population equivalents, you know, killed here on the streets of the UK. We need to be able to see it in that context.
Labour is expected to clarify its official stance on the Israel-Hamas war later, amid reports of senior figures breaking ranks with the party's leadership. In a speech later, Sir Keir Starmer will reaffirm his support for a humanitarian pause to allow aid into Gaza. But he'll also argue that a permanent ceasefire could risk more violence in the region, giving Hamas a chance to carry out more attacks. Two former top aides to Boris Johnson will face questions at the COVID-19 inquiry later. Dominic Cummings, who was the former Prime Minister's chief advisor, who was forced to quit in 2020 after travelling from his home in London to County Durham during lockdown. Families of COVID-19 victims held a vigil outside Barnard Castle last night, where Mr Cummings said he'd driven to test his eyesight. Lee Kane, who was Director of Communications, will also appear at the inquiry. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. A pound will buy you $1.2190 and €1.1444. The price of gold is £1,638.29 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,372 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom. All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond. Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 10:39 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson, who's in for Bev Turner.
The Old Bailey has decided that the Metropolitan Police firearms officer charged with murdering Chris Cabba will be named.
Now, a judge dismissed concerns about the, quote, real and immediate risk to the officer if his identity was made public. The Metropolitan Police says the decision is hugely concerning for police officers.
Joining us now is former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police, Shabnam Chowdhury. Good morning, Shabnam. Good to see you on Britain's Newsroom today. Tell us then your reaction to this ruling.
Yeah, I think having spoken to many officers in the last day or so, it's been very, very disappointing for them. Look, this has created mixed views from the public and within policing, and it will have huge implications for the policing of firearms officers and also generally for the public, particularly when you look at what's going on globally, the current war that's ongoing, the fact that there's a review being undertaken in respect of a potential increase in extremism and the counter-terrorism threat. And it's those firearms officers who are highly skilled, highly trained officers that will be patrolling, that will keep London safe and the UK in general. And if this, now that this officer will be named, and it's a partial thing because he's basically, his name and his date of birth will be made public, which will have an implication for officers who have already said in recent weeks that they will stop carrying their firearms if the officer is named.
And Shannon, what I think is curious about this ruling by the judge, the judge has said that there is to be no image of the officer, so no photographs. But the moment the name is out there, the picture will be plastered all over social media. So it's a pretty... I think it's almost pointless what he's doing here, because that's what's going to surely happen.
Well, there is a potential for that to happen, but that actually his image will be protected by law, as will his home address. And I think what will also happen is the Metropolitan Police will carry out a proper risk assessment and ensure that there are special measures in place to protect him and his family in respect of where he lives and the fact that he then can't be subjected to any visits, abuse or any kind of threat by the general public or anybody else for that matter. But the implications are big for policing, because if those firearms, remember these officers are volunteers. These officers volunteer to do that job. Most officers who actually apply to become firearms officers don't actually get through the training, because it is that rigorous and that difficult a training. Police officers that carry firearms, they do around 4,000 operations, firearms operation, about 800 which are pre-planned, and they are the ones that generally will recover firearms off the street. So their role is crucial to policing, and this will have implications. Now, I know that the Home Secretary has agreed to undertake an accountability review, which she plans to have completed by the end of the year, and I wonder if that will have any change in respect of a further appeal to the courts in respect of the identity of that officer.
Do you think this ruling is going to make it even less likely that your former colleagues, police officers, are going to want to become a firearms officer, Shabnam?
I do, unfortunately. I mean, my nephew's a firearms officer and I worry about the role that he plays. I do absolutely agree that every police officer must be held to account. They know that they're subject to scrutiny, but I think that this will deter a lot of officers from wanting to carry firearms because of the risk that it involves, and because of the fact that if they are charged with any kind of offences, then their identity is known to the general public and they fear that they're at risk of that. Equally, the public feel that there should be no preferential treatment for police officers. So I can understand the concerns of the public, but equally understand the concerns of policing.
I think part of the problem is that within law, there's very few exceptions about not naming a defendant.
Yeah.
You know, if they're a child, yes. But there's not many, is there, Andrew? This is part of the problem. Would it set some sort of precedent?
Yeah, often if it's national security, the identity would be kept confidential.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact is that as soon as somebody is charged, then their details and their name is known in the public domain, unless, of course, they're of a certain age. And therefore, the public feel that police officers shouldn't be above the law. Again, these officers are supported by the Met Police senior leadership. They feel very, very strongly about this. So we have to see how this plays out, but it will have implications for the carrying of firearms, for the safety of the public, and for those officers that do not any longer wish to carry firearms or apply to become firearms officers.
Really interesting. All right, that's the former Detective Superintendent at the Met, Shabnam Chowdhury. Thanks so much for joining us, Shabnam. Really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that police officer will be named publicly on the 30th of January.
Yeah, gives them 3 months to make contingency plans. But as I say, the image will be protected. But I still think once they're named, the image will end up on social media.
Well, it's very easy to find out the image, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Only needs somebody to leak it. Well, to react more on this story, we are pleased to be joined by political commentator and author Tonya Buxton and author and commentator Nikki Hodgson. Welcome to you both.
Morning.
Tuesday morning. Tonya, what do you make of
I'm still dumbfounded that he got charged with murder and not manslaughter to start with, as a police officer, as an acting police officer. I'm still dumbfounded by that. I don't think that his name should be released, and we know all this thing about his image not being released. It's complete rubbish. I mean, you just get onto the internet
it's
for 2
modern
seconds.
age.
It'll be everywhere. I worry about our policing system. I think that maybe we've gone too far from getting the right calibre of person to be a police officer. That's what we should be concentrating on. But I do think we need to protect our police better. I mean, if I've got 2 sons, I wouldn't want them to go into the police for anything. You know, it used to be a stoic, great job to go and do. I wouldn't want them to do that, and I especially would not want them to be able to carry firearms.
It's a good point, isn't it, about the manslaughter, because we can't go into the detail because he's been charged, this unnamed officer, but there was one bullet discharged by the gun through the screen of the car in which Chris Cabba was sitting, and he died. But, I mean, you can't assume there was any intent to kill. No. He was doing his job, and it's split-second judgment.
No, and that's what I found peculiar about that charge, actually. I suppose, when I think about this, you know, there's this argument that we need open justice, so people shouldn't be treated in a different way, even if they're in the police, even if there's a good reason for them to be treated in a different way. But I suppose the problem at the minute is that the Met there's very low trust in the Met.
There's very low trust.
And I suspect that this is kind of a political act on their part to increase trust with the public. You know, they're very driven at the minute to do that. So again, if they are seen to be hiding an identity, especially with the black community, where there's a lot of people who feel very strongly that the police do not serve them well
because the
and mistreat
man who
them.
was killed was a member of that community, Chris Cabba.
There have to be steps taken to protect his safety.
Yeah.
Because he will undoubtedly be at risk.
And his family. That's also the other point. My understanding is he's a family man.
Yeah.
So
he's being made a scapegoat a little bit of this, and that's wrong. I understand that the Met's trying to step up and show the public that, you know, they're not having preferential treatment, but it is all just very muddy and it's not clear, and I think it's wrong.
Well, there will still be preferential treatment because his image isn't being released.
Yeah.
For about 10 minutes.
For about 10
minutes.
Yeah. Because that's what's going to happen. I mean, when I read it, I thought, has the judge not heard of the internet era?
Yeah, exactly.
Does the judge not living in the real world?
Whatever you want.
Yeah. We're going to cross now to the COVID inquiry because the former Downing Street Director of Communications, Lee Kane, is speaking. We're going to have a little listen.
I've had to sit here for 2 hours just to stop him saying stupid shit. And you say, I'm exhausted with him. There's then a gap for an hour, and it may be that there was then a press conference because you then forward a tweet about someone who perhaps was watching that press conference saying that they were confused by what Boris Johnson has said at it, and you say, as your message, no words. And then Mr. Cummings says, what did I say? It's only a matter of time before his babbling exposes the fact he doesn't know what to say. Now, the first thing to ask you, Mr. Kane, I mean, I think it's apparent from what you've already said that Dominic Cummings was someone you'd worked with for some time. You clearly had a close relationship with him. Was this just chatter? Was this just banter, if you like? Were you just agreeing with him because he was your friend? Or did you actually mean that you were exhausted with the Prime Minister and that you were despairing, if you like, of what he was doing and saying?
I think anyone that's worked with the Prime Minister for a period of time will become exhausted with him sometimes. He can be quite a challenging character to work with, just because he will oscillate, he will take a decision from the last person in the room. I think that's pretty well documented in terms of his style of operating, and it is rather exhausting from time to time.
You made the point in your statement, and you've made it again today, Mr. Kane, that if one is in the position of the Prime Minister and considering such a profound decision as ordering a lockdown, it's perfectly appropriate to weigh that decision carefully and to think about all of the negative consequences that will follow. But that's not what you're describing here. What we're seeing here in that critical period is someone who simply can't make up their mind and with whom two of his closest advisors are exhausted.
I mean, I think that's correct. I think there is a difference between weighing up the evidence and looking for challenge on policy issues and being sure that we are making the right decision. I think issues like if I remember correctly, the tweet there from Steve Swinford was regarding the press conference where I think he announced that we were going to turn the tide within 12 weeks, which we were frustrated by, because I think the whole point of the suppression strategy, Chris and Patrick had been very clear that the suppression strategy would be a long-term endeavour. We were looking at, probably a year where we were going to have to do pretty hard measures, alleviate them a little bit, go back into hard measures again to keep control of the virus until, we were in a situation where a vaccine or another method came online, testing, that would allow us a route out. But we all knew it was a long-term challenge. And I think from a communications point of view, the Prime Minister indicating that we basically could be finished with COVID in 12 weeks was unhelpful, because it set a very unrealistic sort of expectation of where the nation needed to be, because it's all about compliance at this point and being honest and transparent with the public about what to expect and how to expect it.
Mr. Kane, you say it was unhelpful. One might think that was quite a well-chosen word from the communications world.
So that is Lee Kane giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. He was one of Boris Johnson's communications.
He was. He worked with him on vote leave during the referendum, and they got together when he was Foreign Secretary, and he went into number 10 with him. Have to remind people, of course, though, that Lee Kane was fired by Boris Johnson, as was Dominic Cummings. Lee Kane went out the back door, a little bit of humility. Dominic Cummings went out the front door with a box, holding a box, which I wrote at the time, will have all sorts of smoking gun emails, tweets, WhatsApp messages, which he will unleash against Boris Johnson.
So are you suggesting that bitterness will influence what they say at this COVID inquiry?
I'm not suggesting they are bitter and twisted in any shape or form, but it does seem, particularly with Dominic Cummings, he has been on a one-man campaign to destroy Boris Johnson's reputation ever since he left number 10. Okay. But I also concede and accept that Boris Johnson, I've known him for 25, 30 years, is a shambles.
Well, Lee Kane said there Boris Johnson was quite a challenging character to work with,
yes.
Which could be a bit of an understatement.
Well,
he oscillates, he said.
I worked with him when he was a columnist on the Daily Telegraph. Trust me, his copy was always late, and it was never what he said he was going to write about, always beautifully written, but never what you expected. You despaired with the call came.
Despair greatly, though, when he's got the whole nation in his hands and he's oscillating to whatever the last person in the room said.
Sure.
I mean, I'm disgusted by this COVID inquiry. I'm sickened by it. The fact that we had to push to get children included in it, the damage done to children, which as a mother I'm seeing constantly, daily, their mental health, the way they fell behind everything. This COVID inquiry is a joke, and this kind of conversations that they're having, dealing backwards and forwards about Boris, just get to the grip of it and let's get some proper answers out of it. It's a waste of our taxpayers' money unless they're going to do a proper job.
And it's going to take, Nikki, years and years and years. Probably 2027. We're now in 2023.
This is the problem with these kinds of inquiries. They happen so far after the fact that actually the public has moved on with what's concerning them in the news. They might still be frustrated and upset and hurt.
I'm not sure they've moved on, particularly not if you've been affected as thousands of people were. I actually think it's incredibly important and is part of the grieving process, if you like, and still coming to terms with everything that happened, because it is still raw for so many people.
But
So actually,
of course,
I mean, it is.
Can I say that one of the things that they're not taking on enough for me, because I didn't lose anyone from the virus COVID. I lost 3 people from lockdown. So that, for me, is not being identified here in this inquiry at all. You know, they're just looking at some people, and that's, for me, it's not enough. You know, they look at them flippantly, deciding, shall we lock down? Shall we not lock down? Oh, shall we? I don't know. One day we will, one day we won't. Not taking on all the tsunami of damage that will be done.
I think they've heard this morning that they realised, the inquiry's heard that it was realised lockdown was necessary 10 days before it actually happened.
Yeah, but actually there's still an argument to have, which I hope the inquiry is going to show up, Nikki, as to whether it was necessary to lock us down.
Exactly.
And was it necessary for people to wear masks, or was it just paying lip service to make it look like they were doing something positive?
Well, what is actually really valuable about this stage of the inquiry is shedding light on the character of Boris Johnson and his vacillation, because he wasn't up to the job. He hasn't been up to the job being Prime Minister for a long time. He wasn't in the first place. You know, he's a serial liar. He's lied to us. He's lied to the Queen. He's, you know, prorogued Parliament. And people that have worked with him know that he's a Chancellor. You know, it's just his character. It doesn't mean that he's not likeable in a way, because, you know, he has got qualities that speak to people. But the point is, he was so out of his depth. And the fact that he had so much pre-information which he disregarded, you know, he didn't pay attention to what was coming out from China, what was coming out from Asia. So, and he was weak in that regard.
Hold that thought.
Yes.
We're coming back to you.
Yeah, we are.
Got to go to a break. Very shortly, we're going to be in Tel Aviv. Do stay with us.
We are going to a break.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 11 a.m. on Tuesday, the 31st of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, Pip Thompson, who's in for Bev Turner.
This is a time for war. That is the message from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has ruled out a ceasefire.
And Labour's leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is going to outline his own position on the Israel-Gaza war amid growing tensions within his party over his refusal to agree to call for a ceasefire.
Patrick's Poppy Appeal. GB News' Patrick Christie's is raising money for the Royal British Legion to show support for our veterans. That's not him. He's raised almost £90,000.
Good on him.
And of course, we'd love to know what you think about all our stories this morning. Do get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.com. Now, let's get a roundup of all your headlines with Sophia.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Israel's Prime Minister has dismissed calls for a ceasefire in the war against Hamas as a ground assault on Gaza intensifies. Quoting the Bible, Benjamin Netanyahu said this is a time for war and that calls for a ceasefire would mean surrendering to terrorism. More than 8,300 people in Gaza have been killed by Israeli attacks. Conservative MP Richard Holden told GB News that the government supports Israel but urges for a humanitarian pause in the fighting.
A ceasefire basically involves Israel having faced one of the worst terrorist attacks ever, then just laying down its arms. That only benefits one side. That shows that terrorism wins, and I don't think that that can be our position. I think Israel has every right to defend itself. You know, if this had happened to the UK, what we'd have seen would have been thousands and thousands of UK nationals dragged off abroad and taken hostage. We'd have seen tens of thousands of people. Those are the population equivalents, you know, killed here on the streets of the UK. We need to be able to see it in that context.
Labour is expected to clarify its official stance on the Israel-Hamas war later, amid reports of senior figures breaking ranks with the party's leadership. In a speech later, Sir Keir Starmer will reaffirm his support for a humanitarian pause to allow aid into Gaza. But he'll also argue that a permanent ceasefire could risk more violence in the region, giving Hamas a chance to carry out more attacks. Dominic Cummings has told the COVID-19 inquiry that he warned Boris Johnson of big problems due to insufficiencies in the Cabinet Office.
How's your eyesight, Mr Cummings?
The inquiry heard that Mr Cummings told the former Prime Minister in a WhatsApp message that the Cabinet Office was totally behind pace and had no plan. He served as Boris Johnson's chief advisor until he was forced to quit in 2020 for breaking lockdown rules. Lee Kane, who was Director of Communications, spoke of a lack of leadership and said Mr Johnson should have done more during the pandemic's early phase. And some breaking news. The government has called off plans to close train ticket offices. The Transport Secretary asked train operators a short time ago to withdraw the controversial proposal to shut offices in England. A public consultation launched to gauge public opinion on the closures received the largest ever response, with the RMT union saying most people oppose the closures. Mark Harper says the proposals didn't meet the high thresholds of serving rail passengers. The rate at which prices are increasing has slowed for the 5th consecutive month. Shop price inflation was 5.2% higher in October than this time last year. The British Retail Consortium says that's down 1% from September. Food inflation also slowed down to its lowest rate since last July. There's more relief on the way today for households feeling the pinch from the rising cost of living. Those eligible will receive a payment of £300, the second in a series of support packages. The money will be deposited into the bank accounts of people on certain benefits and will have no impact on existing benefits. More than 8 million households will be helped by the cost of living payments. Flooding has hit parts of Northern Ireland, with people warned to avoid travel. Storm Ciarán is set to bring strong winds and heavy rain in many parts of the UK. The Met Office issued an amber warning in counties Antrim, Down and Armagh, and people across Northern Ireland are under a yellow alert today and tomorrow. Newry and Armagh MP Mickey Brady says the government is doing everything it can to protect homes and businesses.
We're dealing with nature here. I mean, it's unprecedented, the amount of rain that's fallen over the past day or two. And as I said, in my lifetime, and I've been around a long, long time, I have never seen it this bad. We're trying to do our best to ensure that the least damage is done. And I know the like of BID and other agencies locally are trying their best to ensure that sandbags are provided and that businesses are made as secure as it can be possible.
And the King and Queen arrived in Kenya a short time ago, beginning a 5-day state visit. Accompanied by Queen Camilla, His Majesty has greeted the Kenyan President, William Ruto. It's the King's first visit as monarch to the country, where his mother became Queen in 1952. He's expected to address some of the more painful aspects of the country's shared colonial history, as Kenya prepares to mark 60 years of independence. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Andrew and Pip.
Sophia, thank you. Plenty of you getting in touch today, which is lovely to see. Got reams.
And people are very exercised about cashless Britain. Because they're not all sharing your view, Pip.
No, I think I'm losing the battle on this.
Yeah.
Maureen, hello to you. So glad to hear Andrew still uses his chequebook. So do I, and I still do the football pools by cheque.
Yeah, and Anne says, I still use a chequebook. I send cheques to charities when donating and when they hold Christmas and summer raffles, me too. And David says, my bank lawyers has recently told me in a very high-handed way it won't send me paper statements anymore.
Susan says, I will continue to use it as long as they are available. I carry cash too. I'm a middle 50s baby. Very precise.
Yeah.
See, I'm a mid-70s baby. This may be why we have a little bit of a difference of opinion on this.
I'm an early 60s baby, but I keep my cash and I'm keeping my chequebook. I've got to say, I was very thrilled to hear in the news that the government have intervened to stop that mad idea of closing down those rail ticket offices.
Was it mad?
Mad. Because if you those machines are complicated and they always give you an expensive ticket. You queue up at the ticket office. They're really helpful to staff, and you get a cheaper ticket.
You just want to have a conversation with somebody.
Yeah. Exactly. And imagine if you're a foreign tourist at Victoria Station or one of our major railway stations, baffling those machines if you do English.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So, well done, government. For once, they've done something sensible. Now, the High Court, as you've heard earlier, is hearing an injunction today from West Lindsey District Council to try to stop up to 2,000 migrants being housed at the former RAF site in Scampton.
The Home Office plans to convert the RAF site into a migrant camp for up to 2,000 asylum seekers.
Well, joining us in the studio is the Councillor of Scampton Ward and member of West Lindsey District Council, Roger Patterson. Now, Roger Patterson, Councillor Patterson, you're no fan of the Home Secretary whose plan this is. You think she's an idiot. Get rid of her.
Well, yeah, I have said that. I didn't say she was an idiot, but...
you did say fire her.
Yeah, well, the Home Office, Home Office, they've been lying for the start. They keep saying they're going to meet residents. They don't want to talk to residents. They just have these meetings when it's a tick box exercise. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're doing this. I mean, the last one was a public meeting where I was online, and it was all online, and I asked questions, and they blocked me. They put up a thing where I couldn't actually speak, and I wasn't the only one. They were letting through questions about what you're going to do about residents' racism. Well, there's no racism where we live, and they was going through, but residents' questions were blocked, so they've got to go.
If the Home Office had consulted you more and there'd been a lot more notice about this, if you hadn't already got plans for the site with the Heritage Centre, etc., would your opinion about this have been different ultimately, or would you still say, no, we do not want this here?
My opinion is I've worked out RAF Scampton. If the site was in good order, it's not. It's derelict. It's not in a good condition at all. And we didn't have the £300 million investment that we've got coming to us. I couldn't sit here now and argue that that wouldn't be the perfect place for migrants. Because
you could or you couldn't?
I couldn't.
Right.
Because it would be, you know, open place. You've got buildings there that
so
would be in good condition.
you would be open to it?
I would do, yeah. I mean, to me, this is all about, and to the residents as well, this is all about our £300 million investment.
Just tell us why that's so important. What was going to happen on that site, Councillor?
We've got a space college, hopefully, 2 hotels. I think there was a drone port, a satellite launch thing. Perhaps flats and hopefully for veterans.
So that's going to create a lot of jobs.
Jobs and tourism boost. I mean, the whole area is rich in tourism.
Yeah.
Just up the road is the only Polish bomber base in World War II, RAF Ingham. And
because you're the home of dam busters, you've got all that historic significance.
The Vulcan bomber from the Falklands at Bomport Stanley flew from RAF Scampton. The Red Arrows, until recently, were there. We've seen what the Ministry of Defence have done to other sites just only up the road, a couple of minutes up the road. Hemswell Cliff closed. They took everything from the residents. They sold bits off piecemeal, and the council now is the landlord. The council are actually the residents' management company owners, and they will be for the next couple of years. It's costing the taxpayer a lot of money because they were that badly left behind, and that's the future we're facing at Scampton. If we lose this and we don't get this deal, then we're going to be in the pockets of the council for years.
So even if this was for a finite amount of time, you couldn't see this project getting off the ground again in the future?
I mean, no, they've said the Class Q action is for 12 months. Well, it runs out in March. They're planning for years, a couple of years, they've said.
It'll be longer than that.
It's going to be, yeah.
It'll be years and years.
Well, especially with the backlog.
Yeah. I mean, there's 50,000 asylum seekers in hotels, and they've got to get them out somewhere. And so there's going to be a constant procession of them in Scampton.
And the Home Office have said that they'll work with Scampton Holdings, but they can't, because where they've plonked the port cabins is right where Scampton Holdings want to be building. Well, no investor's going to wait around for years.
No.
They're going to look elsewhere. I mean, this is the best levelling up deal, if you want to put it that way, that Lincolnshire's ever had. And the transformation of the whole area will be phenomenal. I mean, you just can't overemphasise how big this is.
What do you say to those people who say, well, the real reason people don't want it is because they think it'll have an adverse effect on people's house prices and people just don't want migrants on their doorstep?
It's absolute nonsense. Come and talk to the residents. It's not about this deal. You know, people said to us, I've been working on this for 14 years with the council, and we finally got to the point. I met Scampton Holdings a couple of years ago, and I said to people, I've met some people, and it's so exciting. The future is so exciting, but because nobody believes you because you don't know.
Roger, we are going to have to interrupt. I'm so sorry, but Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is speaking now.
Yeah, he's addressing this issue of the ceasefire in Israel.
In Israel and Gaza. Mothers and fathers shattered by the ultimate grief. The innocent dead. Israeli, Palestinian, Muslim, Jew. It's a tragedy where the facts on the ground are changing by the minute, but where the consequences will last for decades, and the trauma might never fade. A crisis where the search for solutions is shrouded not just by the fog of war, but by an ever-darkening cloud of misinformation. But nonetheless, we must do what we can, and we must explain what we do. Democratic accountability matters, particularly in light of the rising temperature on British streets. Our efforts must respond to the two immediate tragedies. To the 7th of October, the biggest slaughter of Jews, and that is why they were killed, do not doubt that, since the Holocaust. Men, women, children, babies, murdered, mutilated, and tortured by the terrorists of Hamas. Over 200 hostages, including British citizens, taken back into Gaza. Make no mistake, this is terrorism on a scale and brutality that few countries have ever experienced, certainly not this one. And that is an immutable fact that must drive our response to these events. As must the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which again plays out on a previously unimaginable scale. Thousands of innocent Palestinians dead, displaced, desperate for food and water, reduced to drinking contaminated filth, hiding out in hospitals for shelter, whilst in those same buildings, babies lie in incubators that could turn off at any moment. At every stage during this crisis, my approach has been driven by the need to respond to both these tragedies, to stand by the right to self-defense of any nation which suffers terrorism on this scale, alongside the basic human rights of innocent Palestinians caught once again in the crossfire. To focus at every stage on the practical steps that might make a material difference on the ground. In the short term, on the humanitarian conditions in Gaza and the efforts by Israel to rescue her hostages. But in the future, also to the hope that I know still burns brightly for those who want peace. The two-state solution, an Israel where every citizen enjoys the security they need, and a viable Palestinian state, where the Palestinian people and their children enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that we all take for granted. And that is why, while I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now, for two reasons. One, because a ceasefire always freezes any conflict in the state where it currently lies. And as we speak, that would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October the 7th. Attacks that are still ongoing. Hostages who should be released still held. Hamas would be emboldened and start preparing for future violence immediately. And it is this context which explains my second reason, which is that our current calls for pauses in the fighting for clear and specific humanitarian purposes, and which must start immediately, is right in practice as well as principle. In fact, it is, at this moment, the only credible approach that has any chance of achieving what we all want to see in Gaza: the urgent alleviation of Palestinian suffering, aid distributed quickly, space to get hostages out. That is why is also the position shared by our major allies in the US and the EU. And I urge all parties to heed its call. Over time, the facts on the ground will inevitably change in relation to both hostages being rescued and Hamas's capability to carry out attacks like we saw on October the 7th. And we must move to cessation of fighting as quickly as possible. Because the reality is that neither the long-term security of Israel nor long-term justice for Palestine can be delivered by bombs and bullets. Open-ended military action, action without a clear and desired political outcome, is ultimately futile. This needs to begin now, because a political agreement, however unlikely that seems today, however painful the first steps are to take, is the only way to resolve this conflict once and for all. That is why our position and our counsel has always been that Israel must submit to the rules of international law. The right to self-defense is fundamental, but it's not a blank check. The supply of basic utilities like water, medicines, electricity, and yes, fuel to civilians in Gaza cannot be blocked by Israel. Every life matters, so every step must be taken to protect civilians from bombardment. Palestinians should not be forced to leave their homes en masse. But where they have no choice but to flee within Gaza, we need crystal clear guarantees that they will be able to return quickly. You cannot overstate the importance of this last point. In conflicts like this, the most painful blows are those that land on the bruises of history. And for Palestinians, the threat of displacement sends a shiver down the spine. It must be disavowed urgently, clearly, and by all. Because while it may feel like a truism, so often the trauma of the present leads directly to the tragedy of the future. Hamas know this. They knew Israel would have to respond. Their aim on October the 7th was not just to kill Jews. It was to bring death upon their fellow Muslims in Gaza. A plan written in blood to isolate Israel from the West, destroy its improving relations with other Arab nations, and ultimately provoke wider regional conflicts across the Middle East.
Well, we're going to go immediately now. That's Labour leader Keir Starmer speaking at Chatham House. We're going to go to Mark White, who is our Home Security editor, who's in Tel Aviv, for some reaction. Mark, you've heard the Labour leader. He's not changing his position one dot. No to a ceasefire.
No, indeed, and really reiterating why a humanitarian pause is absolutely what is needed, and needed as a matter of urgency. As for a ceasefire, he said clearly, a ceasefire would leave both parties at the current state. It would freeze, with effectively Hamas still left with the capability to launch those attacks that we are seeing still on a daily basis, with more rockets coming across today. It would leave Hamas with that capability. Not just that, according to Keir Starmer, it would embolden Hamas to go on and to carry out other attacks in the future. So there has to be the ability of Israel to defend itself, to go forward and clearly achieve its stated goal of destroying Hamas. But in doing that, he says that the people of Palestine, the civilians who are suffering, must be a top priority for the Israeli government there. And one issue is, of course, the humanitarian pauses to allow aid trucks in to help the people, and we're hearing today that as many as 80 aid trucks may be heading into Gaza itself. 40, I think, have already been checked by border officials before moving across the border. That they are hoping to do more frequently and in greater numbers. That would certainly help alleviate the situation as well. But another interesting point I think he made there was the issue about the forced movement of people. And of course, this whole issue, he said, sends a shiver down the spine of Palestinians. And there needs to be, as a matter of urgency, a guarantee from the Israelis that there would be moves to get people back in to their communities again after the cessation of hostilities, wherever that might be, that there should not be the permanent forced removal of the Palestinian people from the Gaza Strip. So very interesting from Keir Starmer. It really echoes the line and the stance that is being taken by the British government, and as he said in his speech there, Andrew, also the allies of Israel, such as the US and France.
All right, that's Mark White, who's our correspondent in Tel Aviv. But a big moment for Labour, because Keir Starmer has not backed down a jot.
No.
He's already had 13 front benchers criticising his position. I think we could well now see possibly resignations. That would be my prediction.
Yeah, I mean, it's threatening this to tear the Labour Party apart at the moment.
It could.
The worst timing possible. I mean, look at the successful Labour Party conference they had. Sir Keir Starmer finally seeming like, many would say, a Prime Minister in waiting. You might disagree, but...
And it felt at the conference, for the first time in years, for me, like Labour felt like a government in waiting.
Yeah.
They really did.
Sir Keir Starmer almost, you know, ready to stroll into Downing Street.
Yeah, measuring up.
And now it does not look that simple whatsoever.
No, because this conflict will go on for a long time, almost certainly. And, of course, lots of people are resigning locally. I think we could see front benchers resigning. So how long will he stick to his guns?
We will stay
Famous
across
risotto,
all that.
isn't
Oh, well, that is true. Now, a little bit before Sir Keir Starmer was speaking, we were chatting about RAF Scampton and that High Court case that's taking place to hear challenges to a plan to use the former RAF base to house asylum seekers. Well, we do have a comment from the Home Office that has released the following statement. We are confident our project, which will house asylum seekers in basic, safe and secure accommodation, meets the planning requirements.
The Home Office has made it clear from the outset of this project that it recognises its responsibilities to take appropriate steps to ensure that the heritage assets of RAF Scampton are protected and preserved, and security operational management plans will be put in place to support this. That will be a reference, of course, to Guy Gibson's dog.
Yes.
The commander of the...
Yes.
His little dog, his Labrador, which was
killed.
Well,
they've had to move the...
Yeah. Because he's buried there.
The memorial,
the dog's buried there, yeah. And, of course, it is the home of the Dam Busters. It was the home of the Red Arrows, so that is all very important part of RAF heritage. I think it's fascinating, but I really was rather persuaded by the councillor's point. They've been working on a heritage plan for 14 years.
And they think all that will be up in flames.
£300 million development, not public money, private sector money, ready to be pumped into an area, and
interestingly, he did say if it wasn't for all that, he would be open to having people live at the RAF base. It's just that so much work has gone into this heritage centre and redevelopment, so you can see why he's going to be a bit cheesed off.
Yeah, and the locals too. Very much. Now, still to come, the King is in Kenya and he's going to meet the President of Kenya, William Ito, at a state banquet. GB News Royal Editor Cameron Walker will be joining us to tell us more.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
.30 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson in for Bev Turner.
King Charles III and Queen Camilla have begun their state visit to Kenya.
Well, Cameron, our own very own royal correspondent Cameron Walker is with us. What are they doing right now?
Well, it's been a very busy morning. They had a ceremonial welcome. They then went to a library. They've had a walkabout with local people in Kenya. Right now, the King is looking pretty cool in sunglasses, if we've got pictures. He's at an urban farm project in Nairobi.
They are nice sunglasses, yeah.
Yeah.
Are they Ray-Bans?
I'm not sure. These are live pictures from Nairobi. He's an urban farming project which demonstrates how food production can be maximised in densely populated urban spaces through what's been described as regenerative agricultural practice by Buckingham Palace, using King Charles's favourite recycled materials. So it's all about sustainability this morning, and yet another red carpet.
I know, even at a farm they find a red carpet for it.
I know,
it's
incredible.
Extraordinary.
But it has to be said, the Kenyan people who I've seen on the live pictures we're getting all seem incredibly excited to meet His Majesty. And these aren't just the people who've been, put in a line-up along the red carpet. These are ordinary members of the public who are genuinely excited to see King Charles, and he appears pretty excited to see them as well, strengthening relations using that power of soft diplomacy as strengthen relations between Britain and Kenya.
Where's the Queen? Can't see her.
Well, she's been at a library, of course, literacy, a huge, huge passion of hers, yeah.
Very good.
Thank you, Cameron. Still to come, well, what we've been talking about. King Charles in Kenya for his first visit as monarch, but should he apologise for abuses committed during colonial rule?
And the protest gone too far? Fast food died mice and terrified customers. Is this protest or just criminal behaviour?
Or animal cruelty?
Yeah, quite.
That and much more after your morning news with Sophia.
It's 11:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Israel's Prime Minister has dismissed calls for a ceasefire in the war against Hamas as a ground assault on Gaza intensifies. Quoting the Bible, Benjamin Netanyahu said this is a time for war and that calls for a ceasefire would mean surrendering to terrorism. More than 8,300 people in Gaza have been killed by Israeli attacks. Rishi Sunak's government has been clear in its support of Israel, but is urging for a humanitarian pause in the fighting to get aid into Gaza. The COVID inquiry has heard Dominic Cummings warn Boris Johnson the Cabinet Office was totally behind pace and had no plan to deal with the pandemic. Mr Cummings served as chief advisor to the former Prime Minister until he was forced to quit in 2020 for breaking lockdown rules. Lee Kane, who was Director of Communications, spoke of a lack of leadership and says the former Prime Minister should have done more during the pandemic's early phase. The government has called off plans to close train ticket offices. The Transport Secretary asked train operators a short time ago to withdraw the controversial proposal. A public consultation on the closures received the largest ever response, with the RMT union saying most people opposed the plan. Mark Harper says it didn't meet the high thresholds of serving rail passengers. The rate at which prices are increasing has slowed for the fifth consecutive month. Shop price inflation was 5.2% higher in October than this time last year. The British Retail Consortium says that's down 1% from September. Food inflation also slowed down to its lowest rate since last July. And you can get more on all those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2196 and €1.1436. The price of gold is £1,639.15 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,364 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come here on Britain's Newsroom, Patrick's Poppy appeal. It is on its way to 1,000% of its target, showing support for veterans.
Got that, 93.
Incredible! Look, 902%.
Yeah, he's a clever
His original target absolutely smashed it and more. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Stay with us.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Caught in the act of fiddling with a plug. Not the best look. Not the best
you were
look.
fiddling
It's
with.
definitely the plug.
Right.
Here it is.
Are you going to carry on, or shall I?
No, I think you should carry on.
You just carry on fiddling with your plug. Right, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Pip Thompson in for Beth Turner, and it is all falling apart.
Yeah.
GB News' own Patrick Christys has raised over £90,000 so far, just been told £93,500 in his Royal British Legion's Poppy Appeal. In some of the countries,
like Brighton, it isn't easy to find volunteers to sell poppies, so that's where Patrick is right now to try and stimulate some interest, and you're doing pretty well, Patrick. How are they reacting to you in Brighton?
Oh, they're absolutely loving it. I'm having a great time in Brighton. I was at the War Memorial for the last 2 hits I've done, so I thought I'd mix it up and see the world-famous Brighton pier. I am slightly worried my poppy is going to blow away in a minute, but look, we are here because they couldn't replace, for a while anyway, a long-standing poppy volunteer. They raised 10 grand here in Brighton last year. It is, of course, not the traditional place where you might see a lot of support for Britain's military heroes. It is regarded by many as one of the wokest areas in the country, which is half the reason why I decided to tip up here and try and do our bit, show a bit of support for our veterans. And so far, we have raised a remarkable £93,500. So thank you very much, everyone, which, considering we haven't even started doing my actual show from Brighton yet, is not bad going. I'll be live 3 till 6 p.m. from the British Legion bar here in Brighton. We're going to have a whole host of guests, including the local MP, a few veterans as well, of course, as you would expect. And we're trying to raise as much money as we can. And it's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. That's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. And I just thought, with everything going on at the moment, we see the Cenotaph barricaded up in London, serious concerns about the ongoing protests taking place there and some of the desecration of our monuments and statues. I thought it was about time that we showed a bit of love and a bit of patriotism in this country, and showed a few other people as well that people do actually really care about Britain and Britain's military history, and that's what's happening.
Patrick, with precisely 3 hours and 18 minutes to go until your show, could easily now hit that £100,000.
Yeah. I mean, this is amazing, right? And can I just say thank you to all of the GB News viewers, all of the GB News listeners, everyone who's taking our content in online, whether it's on our YouTube, our TikTok, our Twitter, our Facebook, however you're accessing this, you are coming out in force and coming out to bat for our brave military heroes. The British Legion does a heck of a lot for the families of armed forces veterans, people trying to get housing, people trying to get mental health care, etc. So it really, really is a massive cause that's close to a lot of people's hearts. And I think we're going to hit £100,000 by the time we go on air at 3 p.m. It's justgiving.com/page/GB News Poppy. And what a message that is going to send to people ahead of Remembrance Day, that people really do love our war heroes, the people that make the ultimate sacrifice, so that, frankly, other people have the freedom to go and do some demonstrations around the country.
Quite right.
Patrick.
He's a star.
Brilliant, brilliant effort.
Well done, Patrick.
Enjoy Brighton.
Yeah, enjoy Brighton.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Great place.
Well, we're pleased to be joined again by political commentator and author Tonya Buxton and author and commentator Nikki Hodgson to discuss, well, this and lots more.
Why do you think people aren't so keen to be collectors, do you think, Nikki?
I think it's just the distance from the wars, actually.
Do you?
I mean, there aren't any First World War veterans alive, are there now, in this country? And I think there's 300,000 World War II veterans, some of whom are in the Commonwealth, so they're not physically present in Britain.
But we've had the Falklands War, we've had our boys were, and women, of course, in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, I mean, I do think part of it is not learning about it. I mean, I studied World War I and II at school and then did war poetry for A-level. So I feel I understand that era quite well, and it was a very big part of our education to understand that, you know, especially in regards to it not happening again.
Yeah, quite.
But also, Tonya, some of our greatest movies are about the First and Second World Wars, aren't they? So it's surprising that you would think a lot of people wouldn't know about
wonderful
it.
remake of Dunkirk. It was fantastic.
Absolutely brilliant. And I think you've hit the nail on the head in the sense it's the First and Second World Wars that you're talking about. We as a nation have lost our appetite for the other wars, but our soldiers have still had to go and fight in them. You know, these people that are, you know, part of our military are taken to go and fight in certain wars that we don't feel are maybe as honourable, or we need them, or we want them. But that's not the point. The point is that they are fighting for us in those wars. Whether we agree to them going or not is a whole other thing. And I think that's what's missing, that kind of like, would I send my... I think, you know, in the First and Second World War, we'd send our sons off, you know, to battle, to save our countries, for freedom, for whatever. Would I send my son to the Middle East to battle? Would I? No
Iraq,
way. No. I'd be holding him.
Probably the last,
there's no honour
probably
to
the
it.
last conflict where there was great public support, Nikki, would be the Falklands War in 1982, because it was
the last
a
one.
task force to liberate British soil from Argentine invaders.
Yeah, but we don't talk about that much anymore, do we? I mean, there's lots of people that don't know that ever happened, especially younger people, and that isn't something that I think is actually talked about much at school, in schools, for example. And I do think that education part is very, very important for people's awareness. Once older people who have fought in those wars, you know, start to pass away.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a real point today of just looking around and seeing who is wearing poppies when I'm out and about.
I've got another poppy which I often wear too. It's in the shape of a London black cab with a poppy on it, because these it's a charity run by black cab drivers who take veterans to war memorials all around the country on Armistice Sunday, which is really special, really lovely. And they're giving their own time, their own petrol. It's a really important cause.
What else should we talk about?
What about this silly council getting rid of the word mother? Silly Lib Dem council called Somerset Council. Tonya, are you happy about this council?
Oh gosh, you know, I'm just
Just explain to viewers and listeners what this story's about, Tonya.
So, basically, Somerset Council have decided that they're going to replace the word mother with parent. But this particular thing that they've changed within their prospects for what you need to do when you're a parent is all about breastfeeding. So why have they changed it from mother to parent when it's about breastfeeding, when it's only mothers that breastfeed? This ridiculous, constant, all-inclusive rubbish. Inclusive of what? Inclusive of bonkersness. I'm sick of it. So this is to take on someone who maybe is a trans person. I feel that as a mother, I mean, it's funny because I say this with my kids all the time, you know, that they took my waist, they took my boobs, they took all this stuff off me, and the man just stood there, didn't he, and just kind of took all the glory that you get for having well-behaved or lovely children. It all came from me. I paid for it. So I want to be called a mother, not a parent.
Quite right,
I think Somerset Council must want to be seen to be, you know... Woke. Woke.
It's woke
keeping up with all this.
What do you think of it, Nikki?
It's interesting, because I'm a new mum. Well, I have an 8-month-old daughter.
Right.
And I don't feel as strongly as Tonya does it about it, because actually I mean, scientifically, and maybe this is where we're going to differ, a trans man can breastfeed, right? It's not common, but it can happen. So you still do have some people that breastfeed in those circumstances.
Well, now I don't what decimal point of the population?
Yeah, but they're still served by maternity services. I mean, the point is, I don't like the idea of getting rid of mother at all, but why don't we just say mothers and parents. Like, that's just really simple. Just add the mothers back in. I mean,
I just said... councils are all going bankrupt. They're not doing their jobs properly. If anybody is trying to work with any form of council, you'll know that they are all asleep at home, working from home, doing nothing. But they've got the time to do this rubbish.
Yeah.
Just stop doing the rubbish and get on with the jobs that you need to do, that you're running so badly behind.
What about Nicky's point, though, about the tiny, infinitesimal minority, apparently trans men, who can breastfeed?
Well,
Do you accept that?
No, I just don't. I think it's unnecessary. I really do. I think once is a trans person that's having a trans man who's breastfeeding, then they can, when people are dealing directly with them, then they can use the language that they need for them.
Right.
I just think it just put mothers and parents. I mean, it's a really simple solution. And this is interesting to me because this is a problem all over the country now in lots of documents that are being changed this way. And I do, as a feminist, feel very strongly that we keep the word mother, exactly for what you said, because we do go through so much kind of physical ardour to have our children. And being a mum, you know, it was a word I was very afraid of before I actually had my daughter. And now I'm very proud to be a mum and be able to use it and feel comfortable that that's part of my identity. So I agree with you that getting rid of mother is offensive, but I just think just put mother and parent.
But my point is we are running in debt as councils as well. So you've got this issue, OK, fine. Don't even go there. Go and do the other stuff that you need to do. This is a waste of time and money.
Fix the potholes.
Fix the potholes, exactly.
Although, relatively speaking, it probably doesn't cost that much to fix it.
No.
Bet it does. It's been gone to somebody to debate it, to decide it.
It would have gone through endless committees and endless time wasted on it. Fix the potholes, get the paint, get the fences painted.
And just leave mums alone.
Yeah.
I want to show you some pictures of mice in McDonald's.
Ooh. I mean, how many are... For people listening on the radio, there are... How many mice are we seeing here?
So these are pro-Palestinian protesters or who took these mice into the restaurant, sprayed them.
Disgusting.
And it's because McDonald's has been supporting Israeli soldiers with meals.
Good for them. And I see there have been protesters outside Marks and Spencer's too, because Marks and Spencer was founded by a Jewish family. What is the matter with these people?
I know, it's
vicious and horrible.
It's gone to...
and that is counterproductive.
It's cruel towards the mice as well.
Yeah, it is. That's the other point.
Yeah, I mean, I protect people's right to protest, but that is just going too far, in my opinion. And the cruelty to the mice. Why have you dyed them? That's awful.
Yeah, because they were all dyed different colours.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, it's wrong on every level, isn't it? It's like you said, we all have the right to protest peacefully and non-aggressively, but doing something like this is completely and utterly wrong. And whatever your political stance is, this is wrong on every single level.
Yeah, I hope the Israeli troops are getting better meals than just from McDonald's, because it's not going to do much for them. You want to go to war on a McDonald's burger.
No, yes, I agree.
Not much. Sorry about McDonald's. There's not a lot of protein.
There's a decent choice at McDonald's.
Not a lot of nutrition there in the food, is there?
I don't
No,
think
but
so.
they need the carbs.
Yeah, well...
They need that instant energy.
But I mean, McDonald's, the best they can do.
Shall we also talk about, Tonya, this got me going, parents charged by a restaurant because of their naughty children.
No, I totally get it.
Damn right.
I am a mother of 4. So I know what it's like to have kids in a restaurant. Now, you know as a parent what your child's like. You know what they're like. So you decide, you have to take that parental decision that whether you're going to take your child to a restaurant or not. It's not fair on all the other people in the restaurant. When I had my daughters, they were little angels. I'd give them colouring and they'd sit and they'd draw. My sons were not the same. They'd be running around screaming like lunatics. So I would not go to a restaurant when they were 3 or 4, when I knew that they wouldn't sit still. It is down to the parent, and it's down to the parent bringing up their children properly. And the problem with most parents now is they're so concerned about their children's feelings that actually all it does is it doesn't... I read this wonderful thing that said, if you are a strict parent, you'll be able to spoil your grandchildren. But if you're not a strict parent, you will be bringing up your grandchildren. And I thought that was a great little saying.
I was in a little cafe yesterday in Worcestershire. Does not allow dogs, who I find are generally much more better behaved than children.
Yes.
But it allowed children, and they were running up and down this restaurant, and I kept giving them, like, the glare, thinking it would work, which, of course, it didn't. And all the staff said was, oh, it's a bit noisy in here today.
What were the parents
Ban 'em.
doing? Where were the
Ban 'em.
parents?
Oh, they were just sat there having a good old chinwag. Totally oblivious.
There's a pub that I go to in Highgate that says well-behaved children and dogs are welcome.
Yeah,
that should be on
I agree with that.
We've run out of time, guys. Up
Thank
next,
you.
it's GB News Live with Martin Daubney and Emily Carver. What's coming up, guys?
Well, it's all about the COVID inquiry. Party Marty and Lee Kane were merely the support acts. The headline act, of course, is Dominic Cummings. It's going to be a Halloween horror show for Number 10. We can't wait, and that's live on the Live Desk.
It is indeed, and we'll be going live to Scampton as the legal battle heats up over the use of the RAF base there for up to 2,000 asylum seekers. We'll be getting the very latest from the protesters who are still there.
And, of course, there's a royal visit in Kenya. We'll be discussing, is it time to pay money or even apologise? I think, no, it's not.
Thank you
Sounds
very
good to
much.
me.
We should all go and find a child-free, dog-friendly restaurant for lunch. Should we try that?
Are you paying?
I don't know if we'll find one.
Are you paying?
I will pay if we find one. I don't know that we will, though. Thank you for your company.
And we'll be back with Britain's Newsroom tomorrow at 9:30, and I will be back reunited with my old sparring partner, Beverly Turner.
Woohoo!
It's been very nice. It's been very nice with you, Pip Thompson, by the way.
Thank you,
Very
Andrew.
nice. And always with you, Tonya and Nikki. A joy. See you
Bye-bye.
tomorrow.
Good morning. Whilst there's some fine weather across parts of Scotland, elsewhere it's going to be a changeable day this Tuesday. I'm Alex Burkill. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast. Heavy showery rain overnight continuing for a time across eastern parts of Northern Ireland. Could be some difficulties on the roads this morning, so do take care. Elsewhere, showery rain across many parts of England and Wales through the day, but some drier, brighter weather for a time before some wet and windy weather pushes in from the southwest later. Drier and brighter across parts of Scotland, but chilly here. Temperatures struggling, milder in the south with highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius. If you're going trick-or-treating this evening, there will be a band of rain pushing its way up from the southwest, but more northern areas staying drier for longer. But that wet and windy weather will sweep its way northwards across the bulk of the UK as we go through the early hours of Wednesday. For many, it will be a relatively mild night because of the wind and the rain, but a touch of frost possible in the far north of Scotland. That wind and rain then continues for many as we go through Wednesday. It could be heavy and persistent at times, particularly across northern areas, with then showery spells following in behind across the rest of the country, and some of these showers could be heavy with some rumbles of thunder mixed in too. Notice the beginnings of Storm Ciarán starting to push its way in from the southwest later on. Temperatures nothing really to write home about, especially because of the blustery, unsettled weather that many of us will have. Looking ahead then, yes, Storm Ciarán coming in, affecting southern parts to end the week, bringing some exceptionally strong winds.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur.